Yes, so my name is Brishette Mendoza, and I've actually been a part of this greater La Sierra University Church community since 2001. When I started at the university, I was a double major in religion and communication, and that was pretty much the beginning of my being a part of this community here.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being open to share your story with us for BIOS. And we're just really looking forward to get to know you more. As we are focusing this month on Black History Month, we would just like to ask, the first question is, how would you describe your cultural background?
Yeah, that's almost a loaded question for me, because I know in the context of, I'm sitting here, it's Black History Month, I do say, so the basic shorthand for me is, yes, I think I have increasingly come to define myself as American when I sort of do the shorthand. But there's also these layers of that, like African American, Black, and then I also think about culture as a sort of bigger palette for me, and encompassing things like my Seventh-day Adventism and that aspect of who I am. That's an important part of culture. It's its palette of experience and even a perceptual lens for me, and so many things. So yeah, I think that it's this rich array of things that does involve everything from being African American, because I sort of feel tied to a longer thread of history, and at the same time, in a very modern sense, have also sort of started to reflect on that identity in a more global way, right? So Black as a label and as a cultural reference point, something that I think is shared by so many people around the world, and I think that's important to me, becoming increasingly so.
What would you say, in your experience, what has it meant for you to be a Black person in your community?
I think something that I've carried throughout those experiences across different communities with me from inside of my own skin has been a sense of, double consciousness. W.D. Du Bois talked about that.
Yeah.
In his 1903, Souls of Black Folk, the sense of two-ness. I find that I still have that experience, even within community here. That I come to my interactions being pretty clear, I think, that particular day about who I am, and even within my relationships, how I see myself in that context, and who I think I am within the community. And then also, I'm always sort of putting on this other perceptual lens to try to understand how others perceive me, and being really deeply aware, I think, in ways that are very connected to being a person of African descent.
Yeah, the having to be aware for others and yourself.
Yeah, so I think that kind of, some people may think it's like a negative thing to have that doubleness about oneself, but I celebrate the empathy that engenders, right? That's the flip side of it too. But also, like, from a bigger perspective, I think that I've celebrate like resilience and creativity, and that creativity and ingenuity is something that has come up, and I think I sort of connect to and gain a sense of identity from, not only for how people who look like me have thrived and overcome things over time, but also just what they bring to the table from the get-go, like having nothing to do with, let's say, like a legacy of hardship and oppression, but just something that that is there no matter what. That doesn't have to be reactionary or responsiveness, but it's just it's something that we see as a thread throughout this particular background that is really awesome.
Yeah.
And so that's something I celebrate.
Awesome. And then flip side of the coin.
Yeah.
What is pain that you've experienced because of who you are?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people who know me know that on the one hand, I'm a very future-oriented person, and on the other hand, I'm someone who has been groomed from when I was a child to have an interest in my own history and even things like genealogy. And so one thing that has pained me as a person has been how hard it is like to get a handle or to just know basic facts of what my sort of ancestral past has been. That's something that has been painful. So for those around me, it's been something I've come to recognize is a lot easier to trace. But as an African American, someone who is descendant of people who were enslaved, and the enslavement occurring in the way that it did, specifically in the context of the American South, a lot of those records have been lost to history and only to be sort of partially recovered by like later technologies that we have today, like DNA and so forth, that help us recover some vague ideas of it. But for me, the sadness and sorrow has been not being able to have a more specific narrative. For me, seeing my children who are, growing up right now in the 21st century, sort of now encounter some of the limitations in terms of perception and attitudes that I thought growing up in the 20th century would be done with, would be the past. And seeing them like encounter similar types of limitations. I mean, in terms of how they're related to on account of difference, skin, race, all of those things have been pretty disheartening for me, and something that it's been something of a surprise to me, and something that I had hoped would not be an experience that we would share of all the things. Yes. When those things do emerge, reminding them that it's not something that has to define who, and it really doesn't, right? So in our conversations, really treat them, so if there's prejudice or bigotry that they're encountering, that is the problem, not the essence of who we are, any of us are.
What do you think people can do? Where should they start if they want to learn to be more empathetic towards the Black experience?
Yeah, I'd say come in a little closer. I know people a lot of times we sort of speak pejoratively when people say, well, I have a Black friend, and that's like their, card of legitimacy, right? But I think that kind of taps into something that is important. I think that people can be more empathetic to the Black experience by simply continuing to build relationships with people of all backgrounds, and being comfortable enough in their own skin to build those relationships, meaningful connections with people who are not afraid to be themselves, as we are being ourselves too. So that's what I would say. I was born in Kansas City, Kansas, and came here to Southern California at a pretty young age, right? And so then for a time, I lived in South Los Angeles, or what people used to call South Central Los Angeles. And then my family was able to, a few moves later, move to Carson. And so I've lived in various parts of Southern California. And in so many cases in this particular context, been in environments where there weren't a number of people around me that looked like me. I do find in relating to other people and talking with them about their experiences that probably is something that's especially pronounced for me as someone who's of African American background. So and I said again, my family has roots, well, as far as their presence here in America in the South. So that's a whole different context. And I think some of my own mentality, some of my own points of reference come from that longer history as well. So at the same time, I feel really grateful that this context is not necessarily those contexts that were in maybe generations past experienced and lived through. So yeah, those are some key points for me about being here and in this particular setting.
Yeah. Love that. I think that's perfect. That's perfect. That's a great place to Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your
Yes.
experience, and sharing in a way that we can learn to love more.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.